So hello and welcome, Excellencies and distinguished guests. It is my privilege to introduce you Dr. Alexander Karp, who has been CEO of Palantir since 2014, and you are a co-founder of this company. And before that, you had a quite distinguished academic career, which
wasn't distinguished. It was academic.
Well, at the end of the day, you became lawyer. You became a doctor of philosophy in Germany, studying also under Jürgen Habermas, who's really famed philosopher. And you are active as well in the fitness area. You do martial arts, as I understand. You swim, and you do cross-country skiing, which is a big thing in Estonia.
I'm a cross-country ski addict. Yes, I'm quite good. We can all go cross-country skiing at some point. It's not very popular actually in America because if you want to have a sport that's successful in America, you have to have an after party. There's no after party in cross-country skiing because there's an after party. Okay, well, yeah. It can help cross-country skiing because in America we suffer because you need to maintain a high cardio and strength basis. And then if you do alpine, you kind of go downhill. And my impression is you smoke and drink and have fun. And if you're doing cross-country skiing, you go to sleep and get up early. But yeah, there's a lot of advantages to cross-country skiing.
At the finish of Tartu Marathon, we drink butter beer. So basically,
okay,
we do
well, that can work too. Yeah.
So there are two similarities between us. One is to avoid trouble and jail. We have to be really careful what we say in public. Second one is we both love cross-country skiing. So you
do classic or skating or both?
Both. Yeah. It depends on the snow.
Terrain, snow, yeah.
Exactly. So you were one of the first CEOs to go down to Kiev last year and offer your support. So how has the AI actually impacted the battlefield, in your opinion?
Well, there's the official version of AI in the broader space, which was really large language models convincing people that technology was relevant, that it could help them with homework and poetry, and they could rap like a rapper, except for they're not a rapper. But the real beginning of the AI revolution really started a number of years ago. It's kind of obvious, but when people say AI, what they really mean are currently mostly they mean large language models, but there are large scale algorithmic utilities of software which are AI, and they have the advantage of being precise. Large language models have the advantage of being able to gather information from all over the world, but are not precise. What happened on the battlefield was that you saw a small power with negligible investment in hardware doing much better than it should based on technical acuity and instruments. And the interesting thing about technology is, by and large, technology doesn't lead to societal change until there's a galvanizing moment where people really believe it can make a difference, meaning life or death, or your business goes out of business. And I before the war, there was certainly a sense we have a global business, so in every market we're in, that software AI was kind of a luxury product. If you were geeky or unpopular, you would kind of, get involved in it. But otherwise, you could kind of just not invest in it. And I think that's, luckily for the West, that was the approach of our adversaries. On top of that, what happens in these countries is where things look like they're fraudulent, like their view of technology, probably the fraudsters grifted on it and took all the money and put it in their bank account. So it really led to a very surprising moment. And then that combined with large language models coming on the scene has basically changed the world. A world where hardware dominant industry with very light software, which light is being a euphemism for maybe basically non-existent, were the dominant players in the world. This had some huge advantages for the Western Alliance because, in general, Europe is a dominant player in hardware and America is a dominant player in software, with exceptions. There are phenomenal software companies outside of America, and there are phenomenal hardware companies inside of America. But if you had to generalize, that would be the generalization. And what has happened now is, and then inside of America, you have the problem that most of the software companies that are relevant are really West Coast based. And we moved to Colorado, which is also on the West Coast. But this moving from this is a joke when we started 20 years ago and we were building products for Intel agencies, really everyone outside the Intel agencies thought that these products were non-relevant, basically maybe useful for a narrow use case, but wouldn't change the world, despite the fact they did. I mean, I think Europe would be very different if the terror attacks that have been stopped by many people in this room, in many cases using our product, you would have a different populist landscape. But in any case, it's now center on everyone's mind, and how to negotiate this, especially in the war context, is arguably the most important thing we can all think about.
So my Ukrainian colleagues told me at Cyber Commanders Forum that war changes everything. So it means that we have the privilege and time to kind of make those changes in advance. So what's your kind of take on how do you see that AI will change the relative kind of power of different countries?
Well, there's different forms of AI. So internal surveillance, we should avoid, and we should use AI and software to limit the scope and intrusive nature of internal surveillance on our citizens. In fact, you have to fight weapons with weapons. So people who understand how surveillance actually works, technical actors with legislative interests have to write the legislation to guarantee us the maximum amount of freedom we in the West. And that freedom includes the right to be forgotten, the right to request to be forgotten. I tend to be, there's many different ways of looking at civil liberties. I still am probably mostly, in Europe, you're focused on consumer and government. I'm much more concerned about what the government sees and how they use it. Can it be used in surveillance? Under what conditions? Can it be used to prosecute? Can it be used to defame you? So limiting the scope of that is also a technical endeavor and has to be done by people who actually understand this and who are non-politicized, which is a problem. We had a vibrant civil liberties community in America. That still exists, but it's often, Republicans are bad, Democrats are good. I'm more on the Democratic side, and but you need nonpartisan people to do this. Then you have an issue, which is that if you just look at it from the American perspective, the West Coast is the dominant player. Almost, not all providers of this technology come from the West Coast. So even in America, you have to negotiate. A number of people asking for governance, which I support, are actually just interested in not buying the best product. You have in Europe, Europe is has regulation. Europe is obviously, you have big countries and large countries. I do think that there's somewhat of a division of interest there, because it is maximally in the interest of Europe to both foster its industry and make it possible for companies to export their software. But it's absolutely imperative for the small countries. And it's a massive advantage for the small countries, because you don't need, with the correct implementation of software, you can outmaneuver the large countries on the battlefield or on the economic field. And here, this country has just a huge advantage, as do countries in this region, because there's the legislation, but then, to quote Durkheim on contractual thing, is there's the preconditions of the contract. So you can have the legislation, but do people really still buy the best product, or do they buy the local product? I'm here to tell you, if you buy the product that's not the best, you will lose. So, and then you have the question, well, how do you identify the real product? And I can tell you exactly what I tell people in America. There are the leaders of this field, you must be in contact with them. The good news for Europe is a lot of the leaders in that field are European. The bad news is many of them are living in America. So you must talk to them. talking to your local provider, whether that's your local provider in DC who's never heard of a large language model, or it's your local provider, that's necessary, but it's, to use an overused term, it's not sufficient, because unlike the revolutions of the past, the difference between the person you know and the person who's best is the difference between winning and losing a war. And this is just a massive shift, and the people who understand this will outperform. The people who ignore this are going to do very poorly. America does have a huge advantage. We have a lot of political craziness. You may not be aware of it. But de facto, the GDP of America is going to increase. It already has increased vis-a-vis Europe quite a bit, which is a cause for concern, because it's easier and the adoption is much, much quicker, especially in industry, in the military context also. And then there's a question of how do we know? Then vis-a-vis our adversaries, look, China, which I think is, and that's something that Europeans have to pay attention to. America has shifted from a country where I think I'm the only reasonably prominent person I know that has an educational background in Europe. And this would have been different 50 years ago, 30 years ago. That does not exist. America does not have the emotional connection to Europe it once had. And so that's another reason I think small countries are particularly important, because you have to go to America and explain what's going on. It's not the case anymore that Americans are as focused on what's happening here as emotionally, and that will affect the politics over time. But America is very focused on China. And then the question is, what are Russia and China doing? They're behind, but we have to be very focused in America, because they won't stay behind very long, simply because while we have the better technology players, they have leadership that's very friendly, that navigates engineering structures arguably as well or better than we do. I would say especially in the case of China, that there's a huge, it's very hard for humanities people and engineers to actually communicate. And that's something all Western societies struggle with. And that gives, say, China an advantage, because that's not an issue that they have as much. On the other hand, they focus most of their efforts on internal surveillance and the actual selection technologies, which are a hybrid of LLMs and algorithms, are being produced in the West.
So some of the people who are advocating that we should pause the development of AI, what's your kind of take on that? It's very easy to talk in absolute terms. We live on the battlefield in relative terms, meaning in absolute terms, of course, typically you have two camps, those that say it's dangerous and those that say it's safe. I'm in a arguably different camp. I think these technologies are potentially dangerous, and the dangers are obvious. Even if you don't get to general AI, where the AI takes over, there are real surveillance dangers that we should all be afraid of and working against. You should have the right to have a personal life, your health, your private affairs. These things should not be things that the government has easy, or arguably companies have access to, or in an unregulated way. But I think the debate is very academic, because the basis of our civilization, I believe, is that the West imposed technological superiority, and through that technological superiority, garnered the rule of law, human rights. The flaw in the logic, at least in the, I would say, Western context, is many people believe that the rule of law and human rights are ipso facto, in an autopathic way, something that appears, and we internalize them because they are a superior way to live. I believe they are a superior way to live, but I believe that they were adopted because people saw that the people who build the best rockets, the best bombs, the best cars, the best safety devices also believed in this ethical framework. And therefore, people equated the ethical framework with technological innovation and growth.
if you believe that, and those are a series of assumptions that most people I know do not believe, the logical consequence is that these technologies are dangerous, but we have to be ahead because otherwise our adversaries will be ahead. And the framework that they want to live in is not a rule of law, not a human rights. For all the problems we have in the West, there are no other places where you can experience as little discrimination, as little bias, as little unfairness as Western countries. So I'm not saying we're perfect, but I do think we're the best imperfect societies that have ever existed. And this is why, not to go offline, I think the fundamental erosions of the West are where people inside Western countries or outside Western countries believe we're not delivering on innovation and things that help economies grow, and therefore adopt what I would view as more regressive policies and views and vote for those people. So I think the progressive, classically defined approach requires heavy investment in these technologies, especially in the military context, and coalitions of partners, both partners and translators. And I would say, if we're being optimistic, I've been saying this for 20 years and mostly got yelled at. Now I only get yelled at every 2 days, not every day. So I think people are moving towards this, not because of the persuasiveness of my arguments, but because of the persuasiveness of the actions of our adversaries, which always exploit weakness. So, and there's we have a raging debate in America about all these issues. And my only simple point is you can be right on all the issues, but if you miss the point that our adversaries will always and ruthlessly exploit internal and external weakness, you've won every point, but you've lost the argument.
So you've had over 20 years of experience actually implementing those solutions. So what's the role of Palantir, and what's the advice to our distinguished guests here? So how do you employ or introduce effective AI solutions and mitigate the risk?
Call your children, ask them who the smartest tech person is, and get them to work for you. I can make look, I think our products are unique. We've proven they're unique. We're a successful company. You need accurate information. I could give you accurate information, but you might have trouble believing me because I'm also selling a product. So don't believe me. You have, and find the best person you can find is the smartest person who's worked at a company that's world-class in this area. There's a famous meme in America I think it's wrong. It's like you win by failing and failing and failing until you win. But in reality, you learn by being in an organization that's had major setbacks and then wins. And there's subtle difference. You don't really want to call the person who's had 50 failures. You want to call the person who's had a company or an organization that has had major setbacks and in the end won. And that you want to identify people who've been at those companies who you trust, so from your country, and you want to put them very close to you and ask them who's real, who's not. Because otherwise you're going to get a lot of conflicting interests and you're going to make the wrong decision about who to work with, what products to buy, what products to implement, who to avoid. So I know this is not, I know your jobs are to talk to everybody, and you do a great job of that. I'm here to tell you, identify a couple people and talk to them regularly. And then you have to have a business or military specific use case with a very tight timeline. And one of the advantages small countries have, and a relatively small budget. One of the dangers we have in big countries around this is in the end, you will need sums that are real. But in the beginning, you need to identify the players that are real and have enough money just to get them going and to actually test what's working. You need to be personally involved. One of the mistakes we have, I'm running out of time, but now we have it all over large organizations, not governments, but any large organization is they're built for a hardware world. In the hardware world, you had the CEO and the tech person, and they didn't like each other. They avoided each other as much as possible. And then, but honestly, probably tried to get each other fired the whole time. And then you see who wins, and the only winner are the lousy results. The software world presupposes the person in charge gets involved in the tech issues. You don't have to be technical, but you have to understand what is the business, what is the military outcome we want, what is the timeline, cut that timeline in half, because if the people are actually delivering a product, they're actually implementing, they need 10% of the time that they say they do. And flatten your hierarchy. Now, this isn't possible across a large organization tomorrow, but you can pick a subset of organization and start with accurate ingredients, who's good, who's not, flatten the hierarchy, define the business use case, cut the business time in it by at least 2, offer that a small amount of money with a larger amount if it's successful, and run, don't walk. And you can have a world-class software-empowered organization. If you violate any of those steps, you will invariably spend a lot of money. And the first way you will know you've gone wrong is you will hear from the person, oh, this is going to work out, but we need twice as much time and 4 times as much money. That's when you pull the plug.
So I think good show and good interview ends well when people want to hear more. So I think you have succeeded in that. So thank you, Dr. Karp. Give a round of applause, please.
Thank you.